Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. It is a truly great pleasure to be able to sit down today with Dr. Gadi Taub. Gadi, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
We spoke many months ago towards the beginning of the war, so I'm super eager to hear your thoughts now that we're this far in. You know, you're a tenured professor, you're a political commentator, extremely popular and influential podcaster here in Israel, in Hebrew and also in English. You have the Israel Update, so I hope that the viewers of this briefing will check out all of your phenomenal content.
Israel Update with Mike Duran from the Hudson Institute, and we also have an exclusive interview with Benjamin Netanyahu in Hebrew with subtitles in English if you're interested on our channel.
Amazing. And I want to actually ask you about that interview. But before that, I don't know if all of our viewers are familiar with you. Maybe we can just start off and you can share a little bit about your unique background and your journey to where you are today and how you currently view the world.
Yeah, I think it's fairly simple. I'm one of those liberals who were mugged by reality. And I was a supporter of Oslo and then disengagement. And this was all based on an assumption that the Palestinian national movement is a national movement in the same sense that Zionism was a Jewish national movement, a national liberation movement. And that turned out not to be the case. We imagined the Palestinian national movement in our image. We imagined the Palestinians in our image. We actually projected on them Western misconceptions of what a person is. There is not all Western conceptions are misconceptions, but I think the idea that is increasingly accepted by both Marxists on the one hand and some free market liberals on the other is that, you know, people like Francis Fukuyama, is that human beings, their aspirations are basically material. And once they are comfortable materially and relatively free, then that is the existence we all strive for. Fukuyama agreed that this is not exciting, but the assumption is that this is enough, and we were not taking seriously the ideological fervor and the religious piety of Hamas. We are not taking our own religions seriously enough in the West. And you know, I'm secular. I respect religion very much. I envy those who do believe, but even as a secular Jewish person, I was slightly taken aback by President Clinton lighting a menorah in Christmas, because on the one hand that's beautiful. On the one hand, this is the acceptance of Judaism. On the other, it's this mishmash of all religions where nothing means much anymore. And in the end, you imagine all religions to be like, we all love all peoples, and our religion is really diversity. And then you imagine that that's everyone's religion, because don't everyone want other religious people to have their own beliefs, to live by their own beliefs? And the answer is no. The answer is certainly no when you encounter fundamentalist jihadi Islam, and we just didn't take them seriously. So we thought that if we give them what we thought was enough for us, which I don't think is enough for us either. I think Western societies are in a crisis because they turn their backs on their own religious heritage, whether they are religious or not, because it's a value system. So they started looking at their own values as relative, and they started not taking their own values seriously and just assumed that everyone else is like that. And so the basic, when we talk about the conception, the misconception that led us not to see October 7th coming, that misconception was that if we take care of the standard of living in Gaza, then this would moderate Hamas. And we didn't listen to their their own expressions of their own theology, in which killing Jews is the apex of what one can aspire to. And if your children die killing Jews, then that's wonderful because they're martyrs and they will go to heaven. And we just assume this is talk, and this is not talk. They live by this, and that exploded in our faces on October 7th. Personally, I, I can't say I was not surprised by October 7th. I was surprised by the success and our impotence, but I was not surprised by their intentions because gradually I journeyed from believing in the Oslo framework, where we thought, oh, two national movements, both aspiring, we thought, to national independence. So here's this piece of land that's divided equally and live peacefully ever after. That's what I thought. And I left that long ago. So my interpretation of what happened on October 7th is that the people who took decisions are still in the Oslo frame of mind. And so the Shabak, which is responsible for intelligence in Gaza, is just completely trapped in the Oslo frame of mind and consistently. Ronen Bar, the head of Shabak, the now rebellious head of Shabak, um, uh, interpreted Palestinian intentions as all uh, rooted in the aspiration to live peacefully in relative prosperity, to put food on the table, to grow your children in a safe environment. And so he couldn't fathom that they would start a war with the mighty Israel. And that's what happened on the night before October 7, when all the signals were there. And Ronen Bar interpreted them as if Hamas was afraid of an Israeli invasion. And this is because, in Ronen Bar's mind, the real problem is the Israeli right. And it's his job to keep them in check, which is why he didn't wake Netanyahu up, because he thought, oh, the Palestinians are nervous about an Israeli invasion. I'll wake this hawkish prime minister up and he'll start a war. So he saw it as his duty to prevent such an occurrence. So the same man is hounding Jewish settlers. So he's a dove towards the Palestinians and a hawk towards the settlers, because in his mind, the problem is Israel, not Hamas.
You know, it's so shocking because if you're walking in a dark alley at night and someone's walking towards you with AK-47 telling you they're going to kill you, you would run away as fast as you can or you would fight back. But yet when that happens to the nation of Israel, we reinterpret it and we say it's all going to be fine. It's wild how as a nation we just can't do what is common sense. And I'm curious if you can kind of give us the bigger picture. How is that possible? How did the chief of the Shin Bet decide that the Israeli right is a bigger enemy than Hamas, who actually is trying to destroy us?
So here it's I think, a complex cultural phenomenon, because the secular leftist elite in Israel aspires to its own conception of normality. Now, this stems from the heart of Zionism, because Zionism was about normalizing Jewish existence in the sense that, like all nations, we will have our own national homeland, um, sovereign state. As the Declaration of Independence put it, it is the natural right of the Jewish people to be, like all peoples, masters of their own fate in their own sovereign state. So that was the Zionist idea of normality, but the leftist elite gradually was influenced by globalism. And for them, normality is to transcend nationalism. And as my friend Irit Linur brilliantly put it, for them, Zionism is Sweden in Hebrew. It's a standardized, neutral, liberal democracy without a national character, only we speak Hebrew. And that dream of normality depended on peace with the Palestinians, because only if you have peace with the Palestinians can you really normalize Jewish existence in Israel and aspire to be like Europe. Otherwise, you're in constant war, and you will always be, or in the foreseeable future, be in a war. And you cannot be Sweden and Hebrew if you remained an armed society in need of protecting itself. So they could not let go of the dream of peace, which depended on imagining the Palestinians in our image. Now, the Oslo framework pretty soon began to collapse. They never intended. Peace was never their intentions. So, in order to preserve the possibility of peace and therefore normality, they could not internalize the real problem, which is that the Palestinians don't want peace. So they had to imagine that the right, the Israeli right, it has ruined our chances for peace, and that crystallized around the murder of Rabin. Now the story, as the left tells it, is basically Netanyahu murdered Rabin and inherited him. Thou shalt not murder and inherit. This is the way they frame it in their mind. So in order to keep that narrative, you have to say that Yigal Amir, who shot Rabin, was incited by the inflammatory rhetoric of Netanyahu, which is a complete lie, because Netanyahu never took part in this inflammatory rhetoric. In fact, he reprimanded his own followers when they called Rabin traitor. He said, not traitor. He's a brother. He's mistaken. He's not a traitor. And if you compare this to the incitement against Netanyahu, which they basically, it's like Trump, they basically call him Hitler, the worst enemy of the Jewish people in 2,000 years on these demonstrations. So there's certainly incitement to murder there, which is somehow became legitimate because our law enforcement is also part of the same establishment of the Oslo years. But they had to tell the story this way in order to preserve the possibility that once you remove Netanyahu, there will be peace. So that is how they clinged to an imaginary Palestinian Authority, and they completely ignored. There has never been a Palestinian peace movement. There has never been a Palestinian leader who agreed to Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel on any part of the land of Israel. So when they talk about two states, they don't talk about two states for two peoples as we do. They talk about two states living side by side in peace. That means the Judea and Samaria would be ethnically cleansed of Jews like Gaza, but the Palestinian diaspora will return to Israel. So you will have basically two Arab majority states. This is the way the Palestinians see it, and the left in Israel hears what it wants. So when you have Yair Golan, now the leader of the de facto leader of the opposition, he's not technically the leader of opposition, but he is the head of the party that seems to be drawing most of the leftist vote, ironically called the Democrats. His interpretation of October 7 is that Hamas had no hope for an agreement with Israel because Israel is so hawkish, and so lacking any other option, it started a war. So the problem is their despair. While I have learned over the years that the problem is their hope, not their despair. We need to disabuse them of the hope of destroying Israel. Only then can we think of anything as living side by side with them. But for the time being, we need to do that by force, to disabuse them of any hope of destroying Israel.
Now, before the war broke out, practically on the eve of the war, there was tremendous fighting and debates in Tel Aviv about public prayer on Yom Kippur. Do you see any relationship between that kind of small little argument and this bigger difference of opinion between right and left in Israel, and what's really contributing to this war?
Absolutely. I think, if their dream is normality in the Sweden in Hebrew version, then in their imagination, the real danger to their dream is us, conservatives, right-wingers, traditionalists, and the religious. They have emerged from the particularist, tribal mentality of those awful backward Jews into the clean air of global individualist human rights enlightenment. Then that, so we are a threat. We are pulling them back into the swamp, while on the other side await the Palestinians with whom they will make peace. There was, I saw that one of the figures of the protest against the war and against Netanyahu is a cartoonist named Ze'ev Engelmeyer. And contrary to Netanyahu's grim vision of realpolitik, he drew a map of future Israel. And there was the Sea of Brotherhood, the Valley of Peace, the River of Togetherness, and there's no Palestine and no Israel. We're all together there. And it's amazing how these people dream these, John Lennon imagined dreams while they also imagine that the Palestinians have these dreams. And you could see the same mentality when on this last Memorial Day, in which we mourn the fallen soldiers of the wars of Israel, the left, which is becoming increasingly radical, insisted on the alternative memorial service in which they mourn together with the families of fallen Palestinians. And so, on the background of October 7, and in the absence of any leadership aspiring to peace among the Palestinians, and certainly no public Palestinian national peace movement, a popular grassroots peace movement, it was extremely jarring. And they have this slogan, Yehudim ve'Aravim mesarvim liot oivim. Jews and Arabs refuse to be enemies. And I tweeted on Twitter, Jews and baby burners refuse to be enemies, because this is what it has come to. We just saw an eruption of Nazi ideology. Why do you want to have a joint memorial ceremony with the Holocaust survivors and the Wehrmacht fallen Nazis? It's completely absurd. And yet they need to maintain that dream. And so, as also Irit Linor, my friend, put it, you can tell the difference between the shrinking left and the right wing majority in Israel according to this question: who are you more afraid of, the Jews or the Arabs? And if the answer is the Jews, then you're on the left. And if you're on the left, the answer is the Jews. That is what really bothers you. So that explains the immense anger with which they attacked public Yom Kippur prayers, because in their minds, that is they think that if these awful people have their way, then we will hang gays from lampposts. While Israeli conservatives are far more tolerant than the left is. And the people who are really hanging gays from cranes are the people you are going to joint ceremonies with. And you refuse to see that. So you are gays for Palestine, and you see us as a danger to liberal values, while you, the left, are the actual danger to freedom of religion, for one thing. Because if you would see anyone attacking Jews praying in public in another country, you would know immediately that this is anti-Semitism. By the way, their original excuse was gender discrimination, because the traditional prayer separates men and women. And so the municipality in Tel Aviv was against any form of barrier in public prayers, but it soon moved to a decision to ban all public prayers except in designated areas. And so I found myself, secular though I am, helping to organize prayers in separation for people who wanted them. And we had a friend of mine who was deeply religious, and I helped put this together in Gan Meir, in a place here, by the way, near the Gay Community Center. Nobody told anyone to go away. We had a public prayer Women who wanted to pray with their husbands could stand in the Ezrat Gvarim with the men. Women who wanted to pray separately had the barrier to pray behind. And except a lone weirdo with a lollipop who walked through the prayer showing us that he's eating on Yom Kippur, nobody disturbed, nobody was disturbed. And in the end, finally, even the courts came around to reprimand Tel Aviv municipality for forbidding public prayers.
Gadi, you mentioned when we first began that you have a 1-hour interview with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he really tells the story of the war. It's very worthwhile for everyone to check that out. It's in Hebrew with English subtitles. I'm curious to know, when you sat with him for that hour, what was your greatest takeaway in terms of his understanding of the way this war has unfolded, and maybe his optimism on the path forward?
Well, first of all, I thought that this was the affirmation of the arrival of the media revolution in Israel, because the legacy media is collapsing. Legacy media here is as awful as it is in the United States. It's a political party, and also what happened to left wing media everywhere was that they gradually gave themselves a license to lie in the name of doing good. So they have become activists, and so their mission is to indoctrinate the public, not to inform the public, to lead the public to the right conclusion. And gradually that became a license to lie. And we all remember Sharp attack. Yeah, Biden one-on-one, he's great, absolutely amazing, until that final lie collapsed. There were many lies before. And then Trump went to Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, who became an anti-Semite. But he didn't go to the legacy media. And it was an honor and a signal of things to come that Prime Minister Netanyahu did not give any lengthy interview to any media outlet except my podcast. And so that was not just a privilege for my podcast and for me, but also the inauguration of a revolution in the media here, which finally will break, I hope, from the stranglehold of the radical left and what we now call, following Netanyahu, the deep state. But what Netanyahu had in mind was to lay out the series of decisions that he took since the beginning of the war and paint a picture of his vision of it, which the public can. I don't think the public can decipher through what the media here reports. Perhaps some of the conservative media, and the picture that you get is that from the first minute, Netanyahu's mind was not exclusively on Gaza. It was on how to change the geopolitics, excuse me, of the Middle East. And so, despite or against American pressure to stop the war, against the pressure, the cooperation of Israel's press with the Biden administration, because the left in Israel relies on American hostility to impose on Israel the two-state solution, which the left still believes in. It can't convince the Israeli public. So it needs an assertive, semi-hostile American president, which by tough love will force us to do what we don't want to do. So they gave up on Israeli democracy. And Netanyahu had to fight the joint front of the Biden administration, the permanent protest, the color revolution, which the Biden administration was, of course, involved in. We now know, we knew as it was happening, but our guesses have been confirmed. A brass in the IDF, which is also of the Oslo persuasion, and refused to occupy territory in Gaza. This is how Herzi Halevi, the subversive chief of staff, invented the raiding strategy, in which you enter and then go out, which cost us a lot of lives because we didn't hold the territory. And of course, everywhere you raided, they retreated and then came back once you exited, and then the press and leftist politicians. So against this coalition, Netanyahu's goal was actually to perpetuate the war so he can roll it from Gaza to Lebanon over and against the resistance of the Americans, and then destroy the Syrian army after the Assad regime fell, after we hit Hezbollah, and then take this all the way to the outskirts of Tehran, because this is the meaning of the war. And if you join this to Netanyahu's speech before the joint session of the two houses of Congress, then Netanyahu sees this war as the front line of Western civilization in its fight against barbarism.
Do you think that President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are aligned at this point for what needs to happen in this war?
I don't know. My professional training is in American history, and I think I have a pretty good idea of American politics. But that does not mean I can decipher Trump. And Trump, I think, to the extent that I can see, it deliberately confuses his interlocutors. He always holds two options. One is very aggressive, and one is very generous. And sometimes he offers the other party the choice, and sometimes he will choose his own. Israel cannot assume that the United States has similar interest to Israel's interest. What Israel can do, and I think should do, is tell its American allies that we are your boots on the ground, as Churchill did in World War II. Give us the tools, we'll do the job. We don't want you to fight our wars. But if your view of the Middle East is, as I think Trump's is, and it's in stark contrast to the Obama-Biden view, if your view is that the problem in the Middle East is Iran and its proxies, then back your allies, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, possibly the Emirates, and help them isolate Iran. If an administration like the Biden administration believes in regional integration, as they call it, i.e., appeasement of Iran, then the way it's trying to construct a new balance of power in the Middle East means sacrificing Israel. And so it was a very difficult time maneuvering vis-a-vis an ally who is appeasing your worst existential enemy. And Netanyahu managed this balancing act very well, in which he did not come out against the United States, but he kept telling the United States that there are things that Israel will take care of regardless of what America thinks. And now I think we're in a much better position. I hope that Israel would take care of its own interests vis-a-vis America's behavior in the Middle East. That is, when it's aligned, we can cooperate, we should cooperate. But when, as you know, Ambassador Huckabee said, you don't need to tell us about everything. Israel should now move to finish off Hamas in Gaza, regardless of what the United States plans for Gaza, because this is our existential interest. And I think that this has been Netanyahu's policy always. We are allies, we are friends, but we are not a vassal state. We do not need America's permission to do everything. And this is, when you think of it, when you vis-a-vis the Biden administration, then Netanyahu, in this interview, repeatedly said, there were people in his cabinet saying, let's coordinate this with the Americans. Let's ask the Americans permission. Let's inform the Americans beforehand. And he vetoed it consistently. He said, if you inform the Americans in advance about the operation to eliminate Hassan Nasrallah, they will put their foot down and say no. And then you have an actual conflict.
Dr. Gadi Taub, it's a great pleasure to sit with you. I'm sure our viewers and listeners are enjoying this, and they want to know, how do they listen to you in the future? Can you just share with us one more time where they can follow you?
Yeah, we are for our English speaking podcast, Israel Update, is featured on the Tablet Magazine website in audio, on our YouTube channel in video, and also on Rumble. So in any of these places, if you type Israel Update, which is these search words bring a lot of results, but type Israel Update, Gadi Taub, Michael Duran, and you'll get there.
Wonderful. Let me ask you one final question.
Yes.
You are a conservative leaning professor in the world of academia. And when a lot of people look at the great challenges and strife in the world between the right and the left, they look at college campuses, universities, and the world of academia. How are you surviving in that world? And what would be your recommendations or predictions about the ability to bring honest dialogue and sincere understanding of the world back into academia on college campuses?
Yeah, well, I don't. I refrain from speaking about my place of employment in public. I'll just say this: no one interferes with my teaching. When I speak with students, first of all, I don't think my job is to convince them join my political agenda. In class, I am very strict about everybody being able to speak their mind, even if this is offensive to anyone. I tell my students, I'm here to offend you. If you're not offended in class, please come to my office hours and I can offend you personally. By which I mean, I don't mean that I will insult them deliberately, but I do mean we will take you out of your comfort zone, because we are not here, we're not about feelings here. We're about challenging your intellectual presuppositions. And so, so long as I can do that in class, which is to allow real pluralism. And believe me, I have a lot of students who sharply disagree with my political opinions, and the subjects I teach often touch on these topics because I teach Israeli history, Zionism, and so forth. Then I protect the rights of those who criticize me to speak their mind, so long as they convey an opinion and not their feelings. That's the rule in class. As for academia in general, I think the situation is serious. I think academia generally has deserted its mission, which is the pursuit of truth and free thinking, and has turned in many departments into something akin to pre-Enlightenment Catholic universities, which were seminars for clergy, in which you studied dogma and you needed to abide by it. Or to take another comparison, like academia in communist countries, which there's one truth and you're not allowed to stray from it. And I did my PhD in America I think at the very last moment it was possible for someone with my opinions to get a PhD. And there was one professor who walked out of class when I spoke, just walked out of class. It was a shocking experience. He didn't say anything. I expressed my opinion about some study, some postmodern study of Native Americans. And my observation, if I remember correctly, was that it was based on a relativistic idea that all cultures are created equal, and that's not a valid um, grounds for study, or something to that effect. I may have been Israeli in my bluntness. I don't know. It definitely may be the case. I'm not always soft spoken, as you may have heard, um, but labeling a student illegitimate, a persona non grata, is beyond the pale. I never do it to my student. It was a lesson for me, but and also my department reprimanded the professor. But it was already very hard to voice any other opinion. I was in a class of students for PhD in American history, and in my class, 35 people or so, there were only two people willing to say anything good about America, anything at all. This was myself and a Japanese student doing diplomatic history. All the rest, Americans, were just there to say America was nobody was speaking of transphobic, as far as I recall, but America's homophobic, misogynist, colonial, imperial, racist, genocidal, what have you, and it all sounded like a preview for the 1619 project. Nobody seemed to remember that America was also a beacon of liberty and democracy.
That is shocking to hear. Wow. Gadi Taub, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, take care, everyone.